Welcome everyone to Science Society, and of course, a special welcome to you, Rosa. And before we start, let me give the audience a little bit of introduction, and so they get to know you a little bit before we start. So, Dr. Rosa Cheesman, she is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Oslo in the Department of Psychology. And she did her bachelor in human sciences at the University of Oxford. And then she was a research assistant at the Twins Early Development Study in King's College, London. And then she did her master's in social genetic and development psychiatry at King's College, London. And then after that, she did her PhD in behavioral genetics with the thesis title Leveraging Family Data for Complex Trait Genomics, also at King's College London. And she won several awards already, including the Sir Kenneth Mother Memorial Prize for outstanding performance in quantitative or population genetics at the Genetic Society in 2020, and the Thomson's Award for Outstanding Presentation in Behavior Genetics Association 2020, and several more. So this is really impressive. You're you're postdoc and you won already all this very impressive awards. So congratulations for that,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for coming. And before
Oh,
we usually start, we usually ask like a couple of interview questions, if that's okay with you.
yeah, of course. Thank you.
How did you discover that you kind of would like to go into the field of research? Was it like a childhood dream, or was it something that came later on, maybe a class or something that happened in your life? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, well, thanks for the lovely introduction as well, by the way. So, but yeah, I think something that really shaped the course of my life was being an identical twin. So I've had a genetically at least identical person following me everywhere I go, and we're best friends, and we've always been asked since we were very young questions about, oh, what are your differences, what are your similarities? And I think as I grew up, I was genuinely really interested in trying to figure that out, and we became part of a twin study as soon as we were born, and we started gradually, responding to questionnaires and so on. And then I became aware that twins are such a neat way to study the role of genes and environment. And then I ended up doing really interdisciplinary degrees, because I was always just thinking, oh, it can't just be biology, and it can't just be culture and the family and so on. I want to understand how all these things fit together. And I've been really, really lucky to have been supported by various people I've met along the way who've helped me to get into this research field and continue interdisciplinary work. So what I'm doing today is very much in the same vein as what I've always been really interested in, like why children are different from each other, and how biology works together with the family and school and geography.
That's really interesting. That's wonderful to hear that you had so many positive experiences, and then had a lot of support to go to pursue kind of your passion, or genuine interest. That I think that's really encouraging to hear and inspiring, your story. And for this specific project, is there maybe some kind of background story around, achievement, success, how that study came about, and and why you kind of worked in this, for this specific project. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are two key kind of motivations for why I'm interested in achievement, and one is that even though it's not the be all and end all of how well kids are doing, like mental health and so on, is also extremely important. But achievement really, achievement in school is correlated with so many later life outcomes, and I think that kids who do well at school do tend to be healthier and happier and everything in later life. So it's important to understand the causes of differences between children in their achievement for that reason. And then secondly, it's a more pragmatic thing whereby in Norway we've got such complete data from the administrative registers about achievement. So it's a lot easier to do a massive scale study on achievement than it is to do on something like mental health, which is quite difficult to measure accurately, and usually measurements are only available in quite small samples of kids. So there is a lot of really good research on mental health going on, and we're doing a lot of that in my group at the Promenta Centre in the University of Oslo. But yeah, achievement is what we've focused on here, seeing as it's such a core aspect of child development and facilitated by register data.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad I asked you this question because that's a really good point, that there's so much more data about achievement, and you can kind of deduct that it has to also later on to do with mental health and health in general. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story and for sharing your personal story also. That leads us now to this presentation. So the stage is yours, and everyone, the presentation is pinned on top of the room. Feel free to access it. And yeah, thank you, Rosa. Sorry.
Oh, thanks very much for the interesting questions. That leads me really nicely into the talk. So I do recommend opening up the slides, because I'm going to heavily base it on different pictures and so on to help explain what's going on here. So on the first slide you'll see the title. I'm going to present an interdisciplinary study where we've really tried to comprehensively tackle the question of why are children different in their achievement at school. So we have investigated genetics, schools, residential areas, and really crucially how these factors are interdependent. So the main message of this talk is going to be that it's particularly important when we're doing research on the effects of schools to factor in genetics, and also vice versa. We can't just do genetic analyses of school achievement without taking into account the actual educational context that children are spending every day in, which is their school. So on the second slide, I've put in this nice model called the Bronfenbrenner bioecological model, and this is a model that a lot of psychologists use to kind of show how all these different influences on children's development hang together. So for a trait like children's educational learning development, we know that the microsystem in the core is very important. So that includes the actual child characteristics. They're born with a certain genetic makeup, and we know that that's really important for their school achievement. So we know from a lot of twin studies that about half of the differences between people in the population in their academic outcomes are due to genes. So yeah, we've got important role for genes, but then children don't grow up in a vacuum just with their DNA floating around. They're expressing their genetic differences in a context, and that context is family, peers, school. Then we've got the broader kind of institutional environment, like maybe the policies of the local region are important. Then we've got the wider culture and the values that people have in that particular geographical area. And what's really important about this model that really gives us a grounding for the study that I'm going to present is that there are these little double-headed arrows going between all these layers. So we know that the layers aren't independent, but they affect one another. So for example, the key thing I'm talking about today, we could have interplay between the child's genetic makeup and their school. We can also have interplay between the wider levels and the school, for example, if there's certain municipality or like regional levels that influence school policy. So that's the key model that we're hinging this study on, and it's important because we need to have a full comprehensive picture of the factors affecting achievement and not only just study one factor at a time. So that's what we've tried to do here. But so if we go to slide number 3, here's a bit of information about what we know about gene-environment interactions for children's kind of academic and intellectual development. So there's this SCAR-Row model, which is talked about a lot in genetics. It's this finding that genetic effects on IQ are weaker for children who grow up in families that have lower socioeconomic status. So on the figure on the right-hand side, you can see that as socioeconomic status of the family on the x-axis, on the horizontal, is increasing, the genetic effect is also increasing. So that's the red line going up and up and up. And this has been found in a couple of US data sets. They've seen that children's genes are expressed more when they're in an advantaged environment, whereas if kids grow up in a deprived environment, it's the idea is that this deprivation kind of suppresses their ability to express, their individual tendencies. Like basically, most of the kids will get similarly low achievement if the environment is not good, whereas if the environment is good, the genes are expressed and make more of a difference. So this has been the dominant model that we have for how genes and environments interact. But as you can kind of already see, that this is just about the socioeconomic status of the family, and it doesn't really include anything about other types of environments. So if you go on to slide 4, I've tried to put forward 2 key kind of limitations of prior research on gene-environment interplay. So even though there's a lot of really amazing research on this that's very interesting and policy relevant, we still know very little on the interplay between children's genes and their family and their environments beyond the family. So number 1, we've relied on studies of how genetic effects vary between families according to their income and so on. So we've just been focusing on parents instead of all the other aspects of a child life that we know are really important as well. And then the second limitation is that it's so difficult to actually know that the genes and environments are independent of one another. And that's actually a really important thing that we have to establish if we're going to know that they interact. Because if we don't know that the parenting, for example, is independent of the child's genes, then we just can't interpret the finding of an interaction, because it could just be that some kids are more likely to be parented by certain types of parents. So we need to tackle both of these limitations if we're going to really have a proper understanding of how children's genes interact with their social environment. So in the 5th slide, I'm showing the cool data that we have in Norway that can basically help us to overcome prior limitations in this field. So first, on the left-hand side, I've got there the logo for MoBa, which is the short name for the Norwegian Mother, Father, Child Cohort Study. And so MoBa is this really brilliant pregnancy cohort study that have been tracking mothers, fathers and children for quite a few years now, and at the time that we did this study we had genetic data on 23,000 trios, which means sets of mother, father and child. So we had their genetic data, and then I'll tell you later what we did with that to create their kind of indices of their propensity for education. So we have the genetics, and then in the middle of the fifth slide you can see basically the categories of geographical data that we have. Because we link the MoBa genetic study to Norwegian administrative data or register data, we know exactly where all these kids grew up. We know the kind of broad region or municipality. We know the district within that, and we know the fine-grained neighbourhood within that, and these are really small areas, so we're really able to, on this fine-grained level, figure out where kids are. And we know exactly what school they went to as well, and we know what their school achievements were across different ages. So we've got this really rich data in Norway, and the figure on the right is showing a map of Norway, and it's showing the education-linked genetics that children have in every kind of Norwegian municipality. And the main point of showing this figure was just to tell you how the data that we have actually covers most of Norway. So we've got really representative data set here. So going back for a second to discuss the genetics part. So I mentioned that we had trios, parent-offspring trios, with polygenic scores for educational attainment. But what is a polygenic score? So this is a measure of an individual's genetic propensity towards a trait or a disease relative to the population. So in this case, we're trying to measure how much does every individual, how much are they predisposed to go far in education, basically. And you can see from this normal curve that these are really continuous measures where most people are in the middle of their genetic propensity for education, and then there are fewer and fewer people who are in the tails with like really high propensity for education or really low propensity for education. And this kind of continuous nature of genetic propensity is due to the fact that there's not a single gene for education, as it were. It's polygenic, which means there are many, many genetic variants that are influencing differences between us in our school achievement. So that's also what we're trying to show here with the three jars. So each of these three people inherit a certain number of these education increasing genes from their parents. Person one is a little bit lower down the distribution of polygenic scores. They've got fewer of these genes in their jar. Person number three, they're higher up in the distribution. They've been lucky and inherited from their parents lots of these education increasing genes. So the key point here is that we've got individual level measures of genetic propensity to education. So this next slide, number 7, that's showing you a kind of mapping out of the data that we have. So if you focus on the figure in the middle, we've got the children's genetics and their educational performance. We know also who their parents are and what their parents' polygenic propensity for education is too. And then going beyond the family, we've got them nested within schools, neighbourhoods, districts and municipalities. So we've got this very neat multi-level structure of the data, and this might remind you of the Bronfenbrenner model that I showed at the beginning. So because we have this really nice rich data, we're able to get around these difficulties with gene environment interaction research. So on the left hand side, I'm bringing up again this typical issue with gene environment interactions, that we rely on looking at things to do with the family and kind of ignore what's going on at the school or residential level. But because we have all this Norwegian data, obviously this means great that we can have a much more comprehensive view of how the child's environment is and how that potentially interacts with their genes. And so the approach that we took here also avoids actually having to measure specific stuff about the child's environment, because we know the actual identifying code of each school, for example, that they went to. We don't need to know all this information about the school. We just need to know overall how much is the impact of genes varying between schools. So that's what I mean by multi-level modelling. And the little diagram is showing basically what we're doing in this study. So looking at how there are all these different regression lines indicating that the effect of the EA-PGS, the Educational Attainment Polygenic Score of children, the effect of that on their achievement depends on the school. So every line is a different school, and in every school there's a different effect of genes. Hopefully this will become even clearer when I show you the results. And so then moving to the right-hand side of slide 7, the other kind of limitation of prior gene-environment interaction studies is that we've got this complicated, interwoven nature of the family environment, the environment that parents select for their kids, and the genes that children get, which means that it's so difficult to identify interactions. But the cool thing about knowing the parent's polygenic score as well as the child's polygenic score is that we can create within family polygenic scores, which basically means that we focus on the random part of the child's genome that is passed on randomly conditional on the parent's genome. So when we know the parent's genome, we can control for that and take that away, and thus control for aspects of parental selection of the environment. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to the results now on slide 8, and I have tried to convey the results in this way that builds on how I've explained the methods. So you can see this multi-level structure of the data, and I've now put in bold the line around the school, and what I'm trying to show there is that schools were having significant effects on children's achievement. And the key finding was that the effects of the school aren't really kind of pure independent school effects, but they really depend on who the child is, what the child's genes are saying about them. So in other words, the effect of children's genes is different between schools, and the effect of schools depends on children's genes. And I'm going to explain that a bit more in a minute, but first going to slide 9 to discuss the geographical findings. So with the neighbourhood, district and municipality data, we actually could not see much of an effect of those factors at all. So overall, all of these different aspects of the geographical environment of children just really explain so little variation between kids in their achievement. So obviously these environments are really important. For example, we know municipalities are key for setting up school policy and funding schools. It's just that we don't find that differences between neighbourhoods and municipalities and so on actually explain differences between kids in their achievement. So, and they're not at all interacting with the kids' genes. So really, we're now going to focus on the genetic effects and the school effects. So slide 10 now takes us into a deeper kind of explanation of this interaction that I found between children's genes and their school. And you can see along the x-axis horizontally is the children's EA-PGS, their own genetic score for their propensity to education, and on the y-axis is their achievement. And every single one of those lines in the middle is a different school. So the main thing to focus on in this figure is that the lines are different. Like there are differences between the schools in the genetic effect. There's variation between schools in genetic effects. And what I've done here is colour some of the schools red according to where the effect of the genetic score on achievement is the lowest. And the funny thing here is that we see that all of those lines are quite high up. So that's telling us that when overall achievement in the school is higher, the effect of the polygenic score is lower. So the R squared of less than 2% is saying that in all these schools, the impact of children's genes is less than 2%. And then in contrast to that, these blue schools, in those schools, the impact of genes is quite a lot higher, it's 8%. And all of these lines are actually lower down, which shows that in the schools where genes matter more, overall school performance is lower. So if we go to slide 11, this kind of helps to clarify the finding. We see that for those children, so on the x-axis again, we have the family controlled education score for the child's polygenic score. And for kids who are just in the middle of the distribution, where 0 is, on the y-axis, the line is really close to 0. It's about 2%. So what that's telling us is that school doesn't make much of a difference for those kids, for kids who are an average genetic propensity. And it also doesn't make much of a difference for kids who are high genetic propensity. So where school is really making a difference is for kids who have low genetic propensity to education. Those are the kids who, even though they have similar genotypes, they have similar genetic predisposition, what school they end up in really has something to say about what they achieve in school. So the more the genetic predisposition of the child, the less school matters. And the less genetic predisposition of the child, the more school matters. All right, so now moving on to slide number 12. So the finding that I've discussed so far is this kind of overall interplay between the child's genetic makeup and their school. We're really seeing that overall schools are varying in how much they kind of magnify the effects of genes. But we don't actually know what is it about the schools that kind of have this effect on in relation to children's genes. So we tried to explore that by seeing whether these 4 different factors that I've tried to show with pictures on the slide, how much those can explain our gene-environment interaction. So those factors that we tried were kind of the level of education that parents of children at the school have, the income of people who send their kids to the school, the amount of immigrants in the school, the amount of income inequality of the people at the school. None of these kind of broad factors could explain the interaction. So it seems likely that there's something a bit more specific going on. We need more data to figure it out, like why the impact of school is so much more prominent for kids with lower polygenic scores. And I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but it's likely to be something to do with the way that Norwegian schools vary in the level of support that they give for children who have lower chance of success at school. Okay, so I'm already at the summary of the study. So if you look at slide 13 now, the main finding was that we found an interaction between children's education polygenic scores. So these are their individual measures of their genetic propensity for school success. And the effect of that genetic propensity really depended on what school they went to. So as I mentioned, this is the opposite to the dominant model of gene-environment interaction that we have in the literature, which is called the Scar-Rowe model. And that's because we found that genetics has less of an effect in a more advantageous environment, whereas the Scar-Rowe model shows that genetics has more of an effect in advantageous environments, specifically when families have higher income. So that's interesting. We've provided some evidence that it's a different picture in Norway to the US. And then the broader kind of implication of this gene-environment interaction is that we really can't keep doing these biological and social research in isolation. We really need to consider the actual individuals, the genetic differences between individuals when we're looking at the overall impact of schools. So there's a lot of research in sociology and economics that tries to quantify, well, how much do schools matter? But most of these studies just look at the impact of schools for the average kid. And our results are really showing that if you do that, then you would come to the conclusion that schools don't really matter. But actually, our study is showing that once you look at the differences between the kids themselves, you see that schools make a huge difference, particularly for kids who are low in the distribution of polygenic scores for education. So we're seeing a heterogeneous effect of school. So just to reiterate that, the research on schools should probably start to incorporate information on children's individual differences, and vice versa as well. So there's a lot of genetic research on education, and it's really becoming clear that the genetic effects, the effects of polygenic scores, are so dependent on context. They really capture a lot of information about the environments that children are growing up in. So, and we've really shown here that genetic propensity for education is not deterministic whatsoever, because it really is expressed in differently in different school environments. So like a child who has a relatively low polygenic propensity for education, if they go to a good school, they can do just as well as other kids who have an average or high genetic propensity for education. So against genetic determinism, as always. And then I've also added at the bottom of that slide, to reiterate, we found a gene-environment interaction with schools, but not with residential areas. And again, that doesn't mean to say that residential areas aren't important and that we shouldn't aim to improve those or invest more in those. It's just that they don't, so far in Norway, seem to be creating differences between kids in their educational performance. So limitations, there's a really bad limitation here, which is that we're only able to study individuals with European ancestries, and these results might not be the same if we were able to include everybody in the population. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future. And then also polygenic scores are really exciting tools for research, but they're not perfect. They don't explain the total contribution of genetics to education. As the sample sizes of molecular genetic studies improve, we'll get more and more powerful polygenic scores, though. And it was clearly enough to be able to capture the interplay between genetics and the environment. So we're hoping to follow this research up again in the future when we have better genetic predictors and when we have more different genetic predictors, not only for educational attainment. And that also links to the third limitation, that we've really focused on the outcome of a school achievement. And as we were chatting about before I started the talk, it's so important to also think about other things that kids leave school with. Like, it's not all about increasing school performance. We want to also eventually understand how schools can kind of compensate for potential mental health difficulties between children, not just difficulties in their kind of cognitive performance and so on. Okay, future directions. I'm looking at slide 15 now. So, what I'm most excited about is to try and increase the policy relevance of this research by trying to find out why the impact of school, so on the y-axis of this plot, like why the line goes higher up towards the left of the plot, like why the children with lower polygenic scores do so differently between schools. Is it because some schools in Norway have really good special needs education and some don't? Is it because some schools offer small group instruction, some don't? Is it because some schools like have really good teachers who are qualified to help diverse children and other schools don't? We don't really know. So if you have any suggestions, then I'd be really happy to hear what we should do to follow up. And if we can identify these kind of environmental factors about schools that can lift up the performance of kids with lower polygenic scores, those could be really useful kind of intervention targets. So yeah, that brings me to the end. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined this call and heard the talk, and huge thanks to all my collaborators in Oslo, especially those who have spent years generating this awesome data set with rich genetic, family, school, residential information. And I also got the chance to collaborate with some sociologists. I have more of a genetics background, so it was really nice to have these interdisciplinary chats. And I'm really happy to respond to any questions that people have. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rosa. This was really a wonderful presentation, and it just highlighted really again how important your work is. And there are a few, I think, pretty groundbreaking results that we theorized about maybe in general, but you show it with like real data. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, and congratulations for this wonderful work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that your work, like the importance is to show how yeah, the genetic backgrounds for the majority is really not that important, but the school really is, and the experience in the school, which, yeah, as you said, that's your future step, right? Which I hope people will listen to and governments will listen to invest into schools and design them in a way that children will have positive experiences. I wonder if there's any way to do similar research in different countries. I know that the US, and I was thinking about Germany, maybe France and so on, don't have probably the same amount of data set. Would it still be maybe enough to check if there are similar trends going on?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'd love to see if this kind of finding is replicated in different countries. I would have to find out what kind of data is available in these other countries. I think what's a bit unique about this data set is that we have the genetics in the family, which allows us to do more kind of more sophisticated genetic methods, and then we also have all these different levels of the environment. But I'm sure there are emerging data sets in different places where this could be done, and I think cross-cultural studies would be so informative. Like here in Norway, there's this really specific kind of way of thinking about education and the way they've set up the education. So it's really all about trying to minimize the impact of school. Like the idea is that every kid has free access to the school, and every school should be should be the same. There's a lot of kind of redistribution of finances to try and ensure that all the schools are have the same quality and the same resources. So, so I would really imagine that that we that we find this interaction here, and it would be even stronger in another place like the UK or the US, where there's much more variation between schools in the amount of kind of investment and quality and so on. So yeah, I'd love to test that in the future. So hopefully I can figure out how to do that. Maybe somebody in the audience can tell me.
Yeah, I agree that I would expect other I would expect maybe other results in different countries. As you said, Norway, Sweden, Finland have pretty good equality kind of living standards and also pretty high investment in education, and they do pretty
Yeah,
well in all the international scoring, the PISA studies, which is really not the case for the US and also for Germany, for example. A lot of kids with immigration background don't do well in schools. And in the US, the districts vary a lot. So yeah, I would be really interested to see. I think I would theorize that there would be even a shift in the two ends um, of the genetic background and the
mm,
high achievers and then also low. I'm not sure in which direction they would go, but yeah, I would
yeah,
expect to see more extremes also
yeah.
in
That's
those.
interesting that you say that. And you brought up Finland, which I think is an interesting case because they have really similar um, values to Norway in terms of being egalitarian, free access to education, and so on. But there's some differences between the institutional contexts in Norway and Finland that I think could lead to interesting differences in the gene environment interaction results. So in Norway, they really have this idea that kids are all the same. They're not just all equal, but they're kind of all the same. And if children have potential special needs, like it can be quite difficult for it to be recognized and followed up on. Whereas in Finland, they have a lot more kind of fast response to any difficulties that arise, and they're more likely to kind of have short-term solutions of trying to get help kids catch up and then bring them back to the class and so on. So that's my understanding of it so far. Anyway, I think that it might translate into there being less of a gene environment interaction in Finland, because then they're consistently between schools doing more to support kids who might have lower polygenic scores, whereas in Norway, even though all the schools are meant to be the same and equal, there's probably a lot of differences in how kids with early signs of special needs are treated. That would be my speculation anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, again, I would assume, for example, Germany has like an education crisis. There are not enough teachers, and yeah, that's the main problem
Mm.
basically. So if a lot of school, you know, I grew up in Germany, so even in my time, and the shortage of teachers was not as extreme. I had like sometimes half a year, not one subject, because the teacher, our teacher, had then cancer, for example, our main
Oh.
teacher, and yeah, there was no way to replace her fast enough. And yeah, this is even worse right now with, aging of population and so on. So
Mm.
if you don't have then parents that study with you at home or support you, there's no way a kid that is kind of and not a supportive environment can catch up, and this has like very long-term consequences if you, let's say, don't have math for half a year or something. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it would be, yeah, it would be really interesting to scale your study up to so many countries and districts. I wish there were similar data sets in other places. So, but
Yeah, that's such a great idea. I think it would be awesome to be a bit more ambitious and yeah, and then not only say something about how to solve problems with the education system in Norway, but like maybe then also even make more general points about what seems to be the best way to support different kinds of kids on an institutional kind of level, like with the whole design of the education systems.
yeah, would there be a way to collaborate with an organization like PISA? I mean, if they do all these large scale tests, how different countries and educational systems are doing, maybe
Yeah,
they would be a great partner to team up with. And I think your
yeah.
study is really, you know, outstanding. They should be happy to collaborate with you. I mean, there's the hope, right?
Thanks. I think my head's gonna explode. But yeah, they must use a lot of administrative data from all these countries. I think the question is, like, do they also have a lot of individual level data that we can use to understand this specific interplay between who the kids are, their individual differences, and the overall school? Um, so yeah, I guess I need to do some research to find out what's available.
Yeah, and if it's not available, maybe, you can persuade them to get the data.
To collect it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be nice.
I'm reading out a couple of questions, and then um, I'll welcome Dr. Shah here for her to ask the questions. Um, how Marie, she's asking how limited is educational attainment as an indicator, and what are the limitations in using it?
That's a good question. So, the outcome that we used is we call it school achievement, um, and it's basically this measure of how well kids are performing in their maths, reading, and English skills when they're aged between 10 and 14. So I think that they're actually really good measures of school achievement because when you look at the data, it's extremely normally distributed. Like it's really capturing a beautifully normally distributed variable in the population where most kids are in the middle and then fewer are in the tails. So it's got nice kind of statistical properties, and we know that we know it's a good measure of their skills. And in terms of the kind of social context of Norway, these are standardized tests that kind of measure kids' skills, but the tests aren't really used for anything. The results are usually not even given to the children and their families. Well, that's not quite right. It's then the results are not delivered to the kids and families, but they're maybe used to like monitor how well the school overall is doing. But the key thing is that these are good variables because they're not like exam results that are really really important for the kids' admission to education or something like that. So it's there's kind of no way for the kids to study for the tests, and the tests don't have important implications, so it's unlikely that they'll be kind of like really influenced by parents or tutoring or something like that. So they are quite good measures of where those kids are at the time in their level of skills for different things. So overall, I think they're good measures of what we're trying to measure. The broader question that I've tried to raise in this talk is that do we just want to focus on how well children are achieving at school. Or I would say that we need to broaden our focus. So, in my own studies going forward, I'm really hoping I'll be able to use data not only on achievement outcomes, but on other types of skills, not just their like reading skills and stuff, but their social and communication skills and their self-regulation and stuff like that. So I don't know if that fully answered the question, but hopefully got towards a richer understanding of what the measure actually is.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was really clear. And then one more question I'm reading from the chat. Did you look at differences between children with neurological disorders such as ADHD and autism and mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an area I'm really interested in. So, not in this study specifically, but we've done another study which is kind of similar, where we've looked at how children differ in their ADHD symptoms. So, ADHD is characterized by symptoms of hyperactivity and struggling to pay attention and so on. And it's a really interesting kind of candidate for this type of research on how schools treat different kids differently, right? Because these kind of difficulties with attention and hyperactivity really loom large at school and are often identified at school. And we've actually found a really similar interaction effect where kids who have really high levels of inattention and hyperactivity, those kids tend to perform poorly in their school tests. But then this really depends on what school they go to. So in some schools, they're actually performing a lot worse than other kids who don't have the same difficulties. But in other schools, they perform just as well as the other kids. So yes, we have started to look at the differences between children in ADHD, and we really focus on individual differences in symptoms rather than between like case control diagnoses. And I think that's an important thing to mention, because even though it is it would be really interesting and informative to know who are the kids who actually have a diagnosis or something. That would introduce quite a lot of difficulties with the study, because there are differences in different areas of the country and the rates of diagnosis. So we wouldn't really know if the results were actually biased by these differential diagnoses rather than by something actually to do with the school. So yeah, we're starting to look at ADHD. I don't know about autism yet. I'm really keen to follow this up, and we have a PhD student working with us who's looking at other mental health problems like depression and anxiety, and how the kind of consequences of those difficulties can be potentially moderated by schools. So yeah, more to come on that. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that future research. And thank you for that question. That was a really wonderful question. And Dr. Shah, sorry for that you had to wait so long. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know that here is very early. Thank you so much, Rosa, for your wonderful research that you just shared with us. And I was just wondering to ask you, you know that right now we are dealing with the exponential technologies, and they are somehow accelerating some sort of skills. Also, in the case of the polygenic risk that you just mentioned, if I want to be specific about decision making, and for example, decision making is one of those points that I think is important, as well as the critical thinking. And I was just wondering what might be your opinion about that, how it can impact you know.
Would you mind clarifying the question there? So, are you asking how, what the impact of polygenic scores will be for decision making about children?
No, polygenic, you know, you mentioned they are limited and there are lots of factors involved. So I was just wondering, in the case of the critical thinking and decision making, as long as we are dealing with the artificial intelligence, and when we are thinking deeply, neural intelligence is different than another kind, which is the swarm intelligence. And I was just wondering if you want to consider this component, decision making, as a component in between the students. What is your prediction? And you think that is going to be acentric or is going to be more facilitate and accelerate?
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. I have to say that you're mentioning some concepts that I'm not very knowledgeable about at all. So I might have to turn the question on you because, yeah, I'm not really sure what you're getting at there, but potentially, are you talking about the different mechanisms where polygenic differences between children affect their education via differences in decision making and things?
It can be the case, for example, when we are considering Norway as a low, for example, population in comparison with, for example, United States. So do you think that those factors in combination or in comparison with, because we know that we cannot measure those kind of things, some of the traits, they are measurable and some of them they are heritable, as you just mentioned. And I was just wondering, out of your experience and the data that you just gather, you think that it's predictable, for example, in Norway, is considering acceleration in the technology and artificial intelligence, we're going to see more collaboration or acceleration in between the children or students, or in comparison with United States or those kind of things?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about, the how the children actually interact with each other, and that might be influenced by their genetics. That's at least what you're saying made me think about, and I think that, yeah, in Norway there's a big culture for children collaborating together and using different types of technology and so on, and yeah, it's a completely different institutional context to other places. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question there. I'd be interested to hear what you
So they are
think.
not coherent, right? Is whatever you are saying, they are not that much in the same direction with each other, correct? In Norway,
Is
because
what the
different
same
type of
direction?
education.
Um, in Norway compared to other countries?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there are a bit there. Yeah, there's certainly big differences which are driven by culture and education policy alike. Yeah.
I see.
There's a lot of pressure on children to be very independent and think for themselves, collaborate and be egalitarian, work with other kids, and not be too competitive or self-driven. So these sort of cultural factors could affect the results here. Yeah, because it seems like in the findings that we get, the schools where that are performing really well, everyone's getting good results. Those are the ones where differences between the children are eliminated more. So it seems like what counts as a good environment in Norway is like where the differences between kids are minimized and they're more sort of harmonious. Whereas in other countries, it could be more like they try to increase differences between kids by like stretching the performance of the ones with more genetic propensity, for example.
So I'm assuming it's going to be very hard to find the differences between these clusters that you just mentioned, because they are totally different than each other.
Yeah, it will be difficult. We need to try and get some data that's as high quality as possible.
So thank you so much, Rosa, for your wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for for all the questions and for answering so many questions of ours and for presenting your wonderful work. I know the hour is up and you probably have more things to do. So we're really thankful for the time you took out of your busy schedule to present this here today. And I think it's really important work, and I hope that the word gets out there and that policy makers will pay attention to your work. And whatever we can do to help you, let us
Thank you
know.
very much. Well, I really appreciate the invitation and getting the chance to discuss my work with you. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, and as I said, thank you for coming here and asking questions. It's always more interesting if people join. And this brings new aspects onto the research our speakers present here. So thank you for that. And if you like discussions like this, follow the club. And the next talk will be about a blood test that was developed by Dr. Niculescu, who can detect biomarkers pretty reliably for anxiety disorders. And thank you so much, Rosa. I wish you all the best for your future research, and we will be very curious to follow your work. And we wish you all the funding. It's such an important work. So keep us updated, and I hope we'll hear you one day again. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, have a good afternoon.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. I'll close the room in 3, 2, 1. Bye, everyone. Thank you.